So I'm not recording a homily, but I wanted to record a few thoughts on a class that myself and one of my staff members, Michael, was giving. Every week through Lent, we've been doing a little class, and I have to say I can't really call it a class since I really didn't prepare anything. I would just kind of go in and just talk. But we've been talking about sin, we've been talking about virtue and vice, and just this last week, I thought maybe I would record some of the things that were said at it because I think they're really good. So this last week, we were talking about mortal sin. So we specifically talked about mortal sin. Now what Michael does, he's much smarter than I am, and so he gives a lot of the theology behind it, and then I'm not as smart, and so I just tried to give a few home-baked thoughts on whatever the topic is. So we were talking about mortal sin. So a couple of things that I shared. When I was younger, I felt like, you ever felt like you're walking along the edge of a knife, right? And if you fall this way, you're going to fall into mortal sin. If you fall this way, you're going to fall into mortal sin. Or, any particular way. The way I demonstrated it was I had some people in the class try to balance a broom on their hand. And you can do it, but it's intrinsically unstable. The broom is constantly swaying back and forth. And so I felt that way. I felt that way in my moral life, like I was swaying back and forth. Now, part of this, you could say, okay, there's maybe a scrupulosity there. Scrupulosity is when we see everything as being kind of sinful, nothing is perfect, and so everything is sinful. But for me, part of it really was also the fact that I was just morally very weak. And so any little temptation was a huge obstacle. It would trip me up. I would fall. I'd be very weak. I just couldn't resist the different temptations that were there because I was just weak. And so I felt always a bit kind of like a drunk person walking down the sidewalk, a little unstable morally. And so to be able to say, okay, this is why it's important to work on developing virtue and strength in the moral life and praying for grace to resist, the temptations in our life, because otherwise it feels like mortal sins are just all around us or the opportunities for them. And so that living that kind of life is actually really horrible. It's miserable. And we can never actually get to the second stage of just enjoying life as being living a life of goodness, right? And even being close to God, because we're just like a drunk person falling into sin here and there and everywhere. Okay. The other thing that I talked a little bit about is, why is there mortal sin? Why is there even grave sin, grave matter? Why is there these things with God being all good and creating a good world? Why are these opportunities for these horrible evils to even be happening? And so you think about it this way. If we live in a world where God is awesome, God's our Heavenly Father, and God sends His beloved Son, and His beloved Son dies for us and gives Himself for us. If we live in a world where God, who created the entire universe and all the millions of galaxies in our little solar system and us as human beings, and He loves us as individuals, as persons, and He loves our dignity, and He's given us this incredible dignity, and He wants to be in a personal relationship with each and every one of us. If we live in a world like that, then to choose to reject that, to choose to reject God, to choose to reject this great love becomes a great evil. And so to do anything that would harm that great love becomes also a great evil. Now, there are little things we can do too. We call those venial sins, right? But they can harm also. They harm that great love, but maybe they're just little things, so they don't break it, they don't destroy it, but they're still horrible. Even venial sins are horrible. If we live in a world with that great love. Now, more and more people are saying that they're atheists, that they're agnostic, and so what you're having is more and more people are saying, we don't live in a world with that great love. God doesn't exist. Life is just a bunch of stuff that happens, and we can't really explain it, and it's like evolution, it's that temptation to say, well, it's just a bunch of stuff that happens. But there's no plan behind it. There's no mission behind it. Like I was talking about in my homily that I gave just this last week. No. Life's just whatever really you want to make of it. And so yeah, maybe there's a right and a wrong, but there's no great love to be violated. And so because of that, there's really no mortal sin per se. There's no eternal punishment. There's no hell. Now, it could be tempting to say, well, that would be great because, without God, there's no hell. But you know what? Without God, there's no heaven. Without God, there's nothing really except my will be done, what I want to do. There's no great love. There's no mission. There's nothing really to live for. And so the reason that there's mortal sin is because there is a great love. That the only way we can make sense of this world is to recognize is that our world is beautiful. There is a great love. There's a great mind behind it all. And He loves us dearly. He calls Himself our Father, right? And He sends His Son. And He gives us His Spirit. And so there's this great love behind it all, which is phenomenal. It is phenomenal when you think about it. Now, just a couple things, a couple examples to kind of bring this out. Because if we live in a world that believes in that great love, then it impels us to live a great love. But if we live in a world that doesn't, then we live a life that's lukewarm. Well, I think we've been infected as a church by that lukewarmness. So, an example, the church still teaches that it is a mortal sin, or that it is grave matter. It is grave matter. It's serious to not come to Mass, to choose to not come to Mass on Sunday, right? So the grave matter is to not come to Mass on Sunday, but to know it and to choose it then makes it a mortal sin. And so to someone who lives in a lukewarm world, in a world where there isn't this great love, you would say, that's crazy. That's crazy. You're telling me I don't go to Mass, I'm going to hell? That's crazy. But to live in a world where there's this great love, where God's given Himself completely to us, and He asks us to give Him 1 hour a week from our however many hours there are in a week, I don't know, 24 times 7, whatever that is. What's 24 times 7? 8 to 168 hours, I think. So God asks us for 1 hour to come together as brothers and sisters and to worship Him and to adore Him and to spend time together. And to somebody who's lukewarm, it's like, ugh, I don't want to do that, right? So they call it the vice of sloth. Sloth is when someone has sadness in the face of doing something good. Okay, that's the vice of sloth. And so when somebody's lukewarm, it's like, it's not that big of a deal, come on. But to somebody who recognizes that there's this great love behind it all, to betray it, to say no to it is horrible. To say, no, my kid's soccer tournament is more important, that's like a horrible betrayal. If we live in a world with a great love that has given us everything. Another little example, so kind of tying this together too. Let's say you have a husband and a wife and they've been married a long time, right? And so the wife decides to prepare a very special dinner for the two of them. And the husband knows it, but he's down at the casino, right? So he's gambling. And he decides to not go home because, I don't know, he's having a good time, whatever. Maybe he's making money. So he chooses to do that. Now, in a lukewarm model where the wife is just used to it and says, that's just my husband, that's just what he does, and just accepts it. Well, on one hand, she might be an example of virtue on her part to be that forgiving. But the model of lukewarmness means that there's no great love there, and so they just accept the fact that there's no great love in this. marriage. And so this betrayal, this violation of trust, doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal. But let's say you have a relationship where there's the expectation of great love. There's an expectation of great trust and confidence in each other, and the desire to serve each other and to make this marriage a great thing. And so then the husband's actions become really destructive, really disastrous. I mean, to have that kind of a betrayal of love becomes really, really hurtful. Okay. There were other things that we talked about, but those were a couple thoughts that I just shared. So just as a way to reflect on mortal sin, if you feel like in your life that you're constantly drifting between this mortal sin or this mortal sin, or there's one mortal sin where you're really struggling with the temptations, it might be because there's a weakness there. There's a moral weakness, and so to be strengthening yourself in the opposite virtue, and then you won't feel tortured. You'll be able to enjoy life and to enjoy the fruits of those virtues, and then become able to see that great love more fully. All right. God bless.